The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling by.
So since we've been talking about Sudan, I thought I'd share a story that's rooted in Sudan. But to start it, I'll give you guys a setting of a time when I was a young, very rebellious teen. Something a lot of people don't know about, which I like to
This isn't on your law school applications, right?
It is not.
Okay.
And also, rebellious in my terms is very different. But there was a time in high school where I didn't do too well on one of my report cards, and so I hid it, and I told my parents that I did great when I didn't. However, as we believe in Islam, the truth will always prevail. And so my father found out about my grade, and I was still aloof about the situation. And it was sunset prayer. Muslims, we pray 5 daily prayers, and sunset is the 4th prayer. And we're praying, and after prayer, I'm about to go home. I'm about to go back to my room. And my father says, "Son, sit down. I would like to share with you a story." And so I was like, all right, whatever. And so I'm sitting down and listening. And he tells me a story about a sheikh, which is a wise man or a Muslim leader, a Muslim cleric, by the name of Farah at-Taktuk. Now Farah, he had a beautiful garden. He lived in Durman, which was a city north of Khartoum, which is the capital of Sudan. And it's where the Nile, the blue and white Nile, merge together. That's where it is. And to give you guys a better visual, if you think about Schenectady and Albany's relationship, Durman and Khartoum are the same. And so this was during the time where the British were still occupying Sudan. And he had this beautiful, beautiful garden right by the river. And every sunrise, as the sun would shine over this beautiful garden, he would just, after his prayers and after his remembrance of God, he would look and just observe the beautiful creation of God. And he would smile. It was a very therapeutic experience for him every morning. And one morning, a man starts running. And he's running ragged clothes, and he's running really fast and starts trampling over our dear Sheikh's beautiful plants. And now Sheikh, although he was a very calm, very patient man, fortunately that was not the day. He yells at the man and he says, "Hey, young boy, what are you doing? Why are you trampling over my beautiful plants?" And so the young man in his raggedy clothes, he said, "Sheikh, listen, the British are after me, all right? The British are after me, and I didn't do it, okay? But you need to hide me because they're going to take me and they're going to do whatever they're going to do with me." And so the sheikh, calm again, patient again, he thinks. He starts to stroke on his long beard. And he remembers, he says, "Oh, young man, go hide in that haystack right there. They won't find you." And so the young man goes into the pile of hay, and they wait for a while. And right after that, of course, the British army comes. And now they're marching. They're marching with their heavy-duty military boots. And the sheikh understood that if he lets these men trample over his plants, it will be very, very hard for him to fix the garden. And so he runs to the men and he looks at the general. He says, "Oh, good morning. How are you guys doing? Is there anything I can do for you?" And so the British are like, "Actually, we're looking for someone And they pull out their wanted sign. And they said, we're looking for this fugitive. Do you know where he is? And so the sheikh starts to stroke on his beard and he says, yes, actually, I hit him in that pile of hay quite a little while ago. And so the general starts to signal his men quietly. And few soldiers start to approach the hay. And they're approaching, they're walking. And then the general says, halt! Now this is a decoy. There's no way he's in that pile of hay. We have to go before this guy, gets away and we can never get him back. And so they turn around and they march like nothing happened. And as they were out of, sight, the man peeks his head and he yells at the sheikh. He says, Sheikh, what was that? You told me to hide and then you tell the British that I'm in the hay? What's wrong with you? And so the sheikh starts to laugh and he strokes on his beard and he says, oh, silly young boy. If the truth could not save you, what made you think a lie would? And as I resonated with that story, I started to reflect on why my dad would possibly tell me this story. And then, oh no, my dad said, go to your room, son, you're in great trouble. Don't you ever try to lie about a report card again. And I was grounded. But ever since that story, I'll never forget it. Even when lying is so tempting in a situation, I just have to tell the truth. And I've experienced that the truth actually has set me free from any kind of trial or trouble that I was trying to lie my way out of. So it had a very profound effect on me.
I can tell.
We've been talking about personal life experiences, so I'll tell that kind of story first. I was sitting in a booth in Columbus, Mississippi with my old friend Betsy Bishop at Denny's. If you're ever out on the road traveling and you get homesick, go to Denny's. They all look alike. You can pretend you're anywhere if you're at Denny's. Even the waitresses all look alike. And Betsy held up the tourist brochure and she said, we've been to every single place on their tourist brochure here in Columbus, Mississippi, except for their historical cemetery. And I said, seems a shame to leave Columbus, Mississippi without being at every place that's on their brochure. After all, they printed it in color. So we got in our car and we went over to the cemetery. You could tell right off it was an old cemetery because it was made for the dead. We don't do that anymore. These days, all cemeteries are made for the convenience of the living. If one of your loved ones dies, you're going to have to buy a marker that fits flush with the ground for the convenience of the man who mows the lawn at the cemetery. But this cemetery was made in the days when people really revered the dead and respected them and didn't worry about convenience. So it was filled with funeral statuary. In fact, it had the most amazing array of funeral statuary I'd ever seen. There were couches made of stone. There were draperies and chairs made of marble. There were depictions of Jesus. It was a Mississippi cemetery. But what caught my eye, the angels. They were everywhere you looked. There were angels sitting and angels kneeling. There were angels standing. There were angels dancing. There were angels playing the harp. There were angels playing the trumpet. There were angels playing the drums. Who knew that heaven had a percussion section? And my friend Betsy said, you choose an angel to be your angel, and I'll be choosing an angel to be my angel. And I said, all right, we do those kinds of things. And we kept walking back into the cemetery. After we'd walked quite a ways, Betsy said, that's my angel. It was a little angel, sitting on the ground, feeding a lamb looked just like Betsy, the angel, not the lamb. And Betsy said, "Where's yours?" I said, "I haven't seen her yet." And we just kept walking back through the cemetery. We were reading the names off the tombstones, those old names that you don't hear much anymore. I wondered whatever happened to all those women named Beulah and all those men who inherited family names like Chiselworth, and wondered what he was really called when he was still living. Surely nobody had to go through life being called Chiselworth every day as a first name. And we walked and walked and walked. I spotted her from quite some distance away. She was in the middle of a family plot, and like a lot of other Southern family plots, all those graves were surrounded by a little white picket fence. This particular angel, I'd never seen anything like her. She had thrown herself on one of the graves, prostrate in her grief. I looked at her and I said, "That's my angel." It almost looked to me like her marble shoulders were still shaking. My mother had only been dead a few weeks. Betsy said, "She looks just like you." I lifted my eyes to the right, and I realized I had been wrong about the idea that we were reaching the end of the cemetery, that there was an entire area of the cemetery that went far, far back. But the tombstones on those graves didn't look like the ones that we had passed. Instead of this amazing array of statuary on these graves, every single marker was exactly alike. Shiny white marble, pointed at the top, a traditional shape. And the inscription on each of those markers was just exactly the same. Unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier, unknown Confederate soldier. So it disappeared out of sight over the brow of the hill. I looked to the left. There I saw an equal number of tombstones, not the white marble ones. These were dark gray, the traditional domed shape, and on them each marker with the same inscription: unknown Union dead, 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 till they too disappeared over the brow of the hill. It took my breath away. Just then, the caretaker of the cemetery came tootling up on his little three-wheel cart, and he wanted to know if we'd found the grave we were looking for. He was certain that we were there for some kind of genealogy project. We told him we weren't looking for any grave in particular, that we just liked to go to cemeteries. And he gave us such a look. And then he followed my line of sight toward those matching graves. And he said, "Breathtaking, isn't it?" I said, "Yes." "Where did they come from?" He said, "You're standing with your feet in the state of Mississippi, but you're really only 3 stops down the train track from the Battle of Shiloh. I guess they buried the men with names at the first 2 stops." "Did you know," he said, "more men died in 2 days at the Battle of Shiloh than died in all the wars that America had participated in total up to that time?" I said, "No, I had no idea." "It's true," he said. I said, "How many are there?" 55 acres. 55 acres of bodies without names. He says to me, "You know, everything's got a website these days. You go home, you could sit down in front of your computer and you'd see that Memorial Day has its own website. And on that, it's going to tell you that some fancy Union general decided about 1868 or 9 that there should be a day that would be set aside to honor the men who fought to defend the Union." They think that that's the beginning of Memorial Day, but The people here in Columbus, Mississippi, we know better. The war was still going on when the women of Columbus decided to come and decorate the graves of all the glorious Confederate dead. Nobody remembers the name of the woman who first said, "But what about those boys over there? Their mothers are so far away." And so the women of Columbus, Mississippi went back to their gardens and they began to cut more flowers. They say they brought them by the wagon load, that you could smell the flowers before you came inside of the cemetery. And those women didn't stop until they decorated every grave. Don't you think it's strange that they would be willing to decorate the graves of the men who might have caused the death of their husbands and fathers and brothers and sons? That was really the beginning of Memorial Day here in the United States. You can ask anybody here in Columbus and they'll tell you. He said, "This is really my retirement job, and I got to tell you, it's harder than I thought it was going to be. At the end of the day, I'm just worn out, and I can't wait to get home and flop down in my recliner chair and have a beer. But I always try to stay up late enough to watch the evening news. It worries me. I watch the news and then I come back and I look at all these tombstones. I watch the news and then look at these tombstones. It makes me wonder if anything like this could ever happen again here in the United States. Could American blood ever be shed by other Americans on American soil? I gotta tell you, watching the news really makes me nervous. But if something like that happens, all I really pray for is that when everything's over, someone will step forward and say, "But what about those poor boys? Their mothers, they're so far away."
So, a story that's coming to mind right now is a story of one of the many companions of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And his name was Abu Huraira. Abu Huraira was his kunya, which is in Arabic his nickname, right? So, my father, for example, would be called Abu Khalafallah, which would be father of Khalafallah. Okay. It's an Arab tradition to name people Abu something, or for the mother something. So Abu Huraira, he was not a father. He actually, the reason he was called Abu Huraira was because he had a lot of cats. And so the Prophet Muhammad called him Abu Huraira, the father of cats. And Abu Huraira was someone that was glued to the Prophet. Like, actually, he's one of the most, he has the most narrations of the Prophet recorded in Islamic history. Prophet Muhammad's wife might be before him, like higher, but it's pretty close, which is amazing. But Abu Huraira came from a group of people in the life of the Prophet known as Ahlus Sufa. And Ahlus Sufa means the people of the wool. What is the significance of this? It actually means wool was something known as, fabric, even in our day now, as a very cheap and very rough fabric that signified poverty. See, Abu Huraira, he migrated from Mecca, his hometown, to Medina with the Prophet, leaving everything, to the point that he was practically homeless when he was in Medina. But that was his dedication to the Prophet and to studying and learning to get closer to God. And so his story is remarkable. And so when I was reading about him, I came across a story of one of the many times where he was starving. And starving in our day is more like, I haven't eaten in like a couple hours, right? This man hasn't eaten in maybe 4 days. And so he was like, you know what, today I'm going to get some food. I have to. And so he waited outside of the mosque. He had too much pride to ask straight up that he was hungry. And so he was hoping by staying outside and conversing with his companions someone would invite him to some food. And so he waited out and in the hot sun of Saudi Arabia, and Abu Bakr, which is the Prophet's best friend, walks by. And so Abu Huraira says in his story that he asked Abu Bakr a question on the interpretation of a verse in the Quran, which is the holy book of Muslims. A question that he already knew the answer of, but he just wanted to spark some conversation. And so he asked this question, and Abu Bakr answered the question and walked away. And Abu Huraira makes sure to point out to us that he was well aware of the answer, and he just wanted to spark some conversation. And so the next friend, Omar, walks by. And Omar, he's a very strong guy, right? He walks in, and Abu Huraira, he says, "Hey, Omar, how are you doing? Peace be upon you. I was wondering, can you, explain something that was discussed today from the Prophet? Because I was kind of confused. I was hoping you can explain it to me." And so Omar, very knowledgeable, starts to answer, very sophisticated, and gives a very sophisticated response and walks away. And so, Abu Hurairah begins to feel a little discouraged. He's like, "Oh man, like nobody's catching the hint." And so, he's starting to, grow a little despair. Like he starts to feel a little despair, and he's all sad. And all of a sudden, the noble Prophet walks by. And just the way he walks, it's like a superhero entering the scene, And so Abu Huraira smiles and he says, "Oh Prophet, how are you?" And the Prophet looks at him and he can tell there's some stress in this young body of Abu Huraira. He looks at him and he says, "Abu Huraira, stand up." And so Abu Huraira stands up and he's like, "Uh-oh, am I in trouble?" And the Prophet then says, "Let's go get some food." And Abu Huraira was like, "Yes, yes." And then after that, they walked to the Prophet's house, where his beloved wife was, and the Prophet greets her in his warm way of greeting his wife. He says, "Oh Aisha, is there any food for us today?" And something that everyone knows is Prophet Muhammad was a very humble man as well. He didn't have much as well. And so, Aisha looks to see if there's any food, and there was only a bowl of milk. And in some narrations, it's yogurt, according to the translation. And so Aisha says, "Yeah, we have some yogurt." And so the Prophet recites some prayers upon it. And then he looks at Abu Huraira and he says, "Abu Huraira, go get all of Ahlul Sufa together. We're going to have a feast today with this bowl." And Abu Huraira, his face dropped. Because the etiquette of the Arabs back in the day was that the one who invites is always the final person to enjoy this meal. And so he knew that he had to gather everybody, and then he'd be the last to enjoy. And so he goes because it's the Prophet. He has to listen out of love and respect for him. He goes to the streets of Medina and he calls all of Ahlul Sufa, all the people of the wool. And they all come, all in their raggedy wool, garments. And they're rejoicing because they're also about to get some food, right? And so the Prophet then invites everyone to the house and they begin. And so he gives the first man some, a bowl of the milk, and he starts to drink and drink and drink. Abu Huraira already thinks it's over. And he starts to drink, and then he was satisfied and he passes it down. And he drinks and he drinks and he drinks, and they pass it down. And Abu Huraira is kind of shocked. He's like, "Wait, how is it still here?" Two men, he's like, "I'm sure one person could have took that down." And so they're continuing to drink and drink. And until, literally 20 people later, it makes it to Abu Huraira. And Abu Huraira is so excited. And the Prophet says, drink, O Abu Huraira, O father of cats. And so he says, don't mind if I do. And he picks up the bowl of milk and he starts to drink and drink and drink. And he puts it down. He starts to feel kind of full. And the Prophet said, no, Abu Huraira, you're going to continue drinking. So he picks it up again and drinks and drinks. And then he puts it down. And the Prophet said, nope, keep drinking. And he picks it up and he drinks and drinks. And then he starts to struggle. He said, Prophet, I can't do this anymore. And the Prophet said, okay, you may stop. And I just found it so powerful of a story because the Prophet was just so emotionally intelligent. He was able to see right away that Abu Huraira was feeling some intense hunger. And he was able to alleviate his stress by feeding him. And not only that, but teaching him a lesson of etiquette. A lesson of, even when you're thinking all about yourself, it's also important to think about your community, to think about others who are struggling just like you. And so that story resonated with me greatly. And it's a story that I constantly remind myself and others, especially during sermons and during community service works, that the leader is the servant. It's not a position, it's not a fancy title, but it's all about serving and being humble, and making sure that you put everyone else first before yourself. So it's a very powerful story.
If it sounds familiar, it's because it's such an old story. There was an old king who had 3 daughters. And one time, one by one, he called the girls to him and he said, "What would you have me get for you whenever I go to town?" Well, the oldest girl, she said, "I want a bright, flashing red dress." The middle girl, she said, "I want a dark, flashing green dress." And the youngest, she said, "Bring me a dress of solid white. Please, Daddy." Well, the old king went to town and he did up his business, and when he finished, he bought those 3 dresses for his daughters, and he folded them carefully and put them in his saddlebags. And as he rode home, as he was riding down one of those mountain trails, a branch came down low off a maple tree. He's a proud man, too stubborn to bend his head. And so he reached up with his hand and he broke off that maple limb. And when it was broken, it was covered all over in beautiful white roses. Well, that was a great wonder. So the king put it before him on his saddle horn and he rode home. And when he got there, he called his daughters to him again, and this time he said, "How much do you love me?" Well, the oldest girl, she said, "I love you more than all the gold and jewels in the whole world." But the old king liked her answer. He broke off one of those white roses and laid it on that bright, flashing red dress, handed it to the girl, and she went to make herself ready to go to a dance. And then the middle girl came in. He said, "How much do you love me?" She said, "I love you more than all the husbands and boyfriends I could ever have." That was what she had on her mind. But the king liked her answer too, so he broke off one of those white roses and laid it on that dark, flashing green dress, and she went to make herself ready to go to a dance. And then the youngest came in, and she had always been the one that he had loved the best of all, so he was eager to hear her answer. He said, "How much do you love me?" She said, "I don't have an answer for a question like that. I just love you, that's all." He said, "No, I want to know. You tell me how much you love me." She said, "I just love you. I don't know how to tell you how much. I love you like meat loves salt." "What?" said the old king. "I love you like meat loves salt." The king flew into a terrible rage. He grabbed the white dress and he slung it on the ground. He grabbed the girl and dragged her out and locked her up in a high tower where she saw no one except one old woman who cooked for her and brought her water. And there she stayed for a long time. One day, she was sitting in the tower window, combing out her long hair and letting her tears flow down her face. And the Duke of England came riding across the land, and he looked up and saw the girl sitting there in the tower window. I guess there must have been a grapevine growing up the side of that tower, because the Duke took hand to that vine and climbed right up to her window. He brought her out and set her before him on his horse, rode away with her, took ship to England, and there, in his own country, he married her. And the two of them, they lived very happy together. As time went by, the other two girls got married as well and went to live with their own husbands. And when the old king grew older and older, when he could no longer care for himself, someone else took the throne, and he was sent to live with the oldest girl. All the beautiful things he brought from his old home, she sold for her own pleasure, so he knew that she didn't really love him. He went to live with the middle girl. Her husband didn't like the old king, and the daughter was ashamed of her father, and she made him eat in the kitchen and sleep among the servants. And in his anger and his pride, the old king wandered away. Nobody cared enough about him to go see where he had gone. As more time went on, those two girls' husbands began making a war against the Duke of England, and the Duke brought his troops and his ships and his wife. He came to fight in the war. When his wife reached her own country again, she turned to her husband and she said, "I've lived with you for a long time, and we've always been happy together, but I'm pining for the place I used to live when I was a little girl. I want to go and see it again, and after I've seen it, I'll come back to you." When she came to the place where her old home had stood, there was nothing left but a burnt and charred out ruin of a building. But there was her old father, wandering through the ruins, cloudy-headed in his mind. He'd made himself a crown out of blackberry briars he wrapped around his head, and as he walked along, he kept muttering to himself. When the girl saw him there, all the years she spent in the tower fell away from her, and all she saw there was her old daddy who needed her. So she went to him, and although he didn't recognize her, he let her lead him away. She brought him back to her husband, the Duke. And when the war was won, they took ship and sailed once again to England. And there, in her new home, the girl made a beautiful apartment of rooms for her father. She saw that he was never going to want for any kind of good thing. And then one night she went to the kitchen. She said to the cook, "Tonight, when you fix the meal, I want you to fix the meat without a single speck of salt." "I don't want to do that," said the cook. "That's not going to taste right." "You do as you were bidden," said the girl. And so that night, when the meal was put on the table, the king came and sat down, and when he had tasted his food, he dropped his face into his hands and he began to weep bitterly. He said, "I had a daughter, and I asked her how much she loved me. And she said she loved me like meat loves salt. But I was very cruel to her. I didn't even try to understand what the child was telling me. I don't even know what's become of the girl by now." "Father," said the girl. And when the old king raised his face up out of his hands, standing in front of him, holding the salt cellar, there was his youngest girl. And his mind came back to him. He called a servant to him and sent the servant across the ocean water to bring the white dress that he had promised her. And when it was brought, on it there was a spray of beautiful white roses, and they were as fresh and as fragrant as the day that they'd been picked. If the story sounds familiar to you, it was very, very popular when William Shakespeare was alive. Everybody knew the story. He liked the story so much he made a play out of it. It's called King Lear. People could enjoy all the theatrics of how it was presented because they all knew the story very, very well.
I called it Femme, and so this is how it goes. Don't be a fool. My pops used to put me in school. Car rides always used to hear jewels. You roll your eyes now till you're thinking it through. Don't forget, boy, I used to be you. I know your shoe size. As a youngin', I wrote a few rhymes. Civil war in my home, some of my crew died. But I always kept my trust in the Most High. And that's why you're here cruising in the NY, so praise your Lord. Soften my heart as my face hits the floor. I pray for you. May the Lord please reward. How many favors from Allah we've ignored, back from sujood and I'm feeling restored. Ready for war, I raise my pen like a sword, fighting my desires, trying to open the door of mercy. Life ends with the hearse, be who prepared, don't be scared, just be alert, be. And that's the first verse. And the second verse goes, don't be a fool. My mom used to put me in school. Living room, man, I used to hear Jules, Ya Habibi, I'm always thinking about you. You roll your eyes now till you're thinking this through. Praise the Most High. You only see war thanks to Wi-Fi. No airstrikes, no occupation here in NY. No blockades like our people out in Palestine. Walking to school with no fear or landmines, so praise your Lord. Pray for the Prophet and pray for my father. There's always another person that got it harder. We ought to humble ourselves like Muhammad taught us. Peace be upon him and the Sahaba. They people of honor. The world ruled by the dollar, but we refuse and resume to serving Allah. My son Khalafallah, live by your name, my son. Don't do this for a gain or the fame, young one. And then the final one. And this was right after graduation. Don't be a fool. Now I teach you the attitude of gratitude. I graduated, I made it, traveled the avenues and struggles. I had a few and survive I had to do. But his plan is perfect, y'all. He knows what you can handle, dude. Patiently waiting because I'm his creation. Trying to praise him in all of my conversations. Amazing how from a kid he guided me to a man. From a fool he guided me with Islam. Please understand, your journey will find ease, and on the other hand, your journey will have trial. But through it all, patience is what you need, and I promise, in this life, in the next, you will succeed. And then I did an a cappella for my grandfather, who passed away a few years ago. Don't be a fool. My grandfather used to put me to school, not through words, man. I used to see Jules. How you used to smile, man, I truly miss you. I try and read Quran now because you used to. You was so beautiful. Mama told us how you raised her. I pray Allah grants you Jannah with the acres. I pray your grave is nice and spacious. I pray we join you when it's time to meet our Maker. Ameen to that. You always prayed for my deen intact, my heart clean and good deeds be stacked. I never told you how much I needed that. In this world where they misleading cats, but you will live through us, R.I.P. and best believe in that.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round.